Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So this is a version number 2 of the video that I uploaded yesterday because I made a couple of errors in my path of building. And mainly around how to generate power charges and frenzy charges, which I have now figured out a perfectly easy solution to, and it's surprisingly easier than you would think. Now, damage-wise, it's not as high as the initial tree, though there are variants of totems that you can apply in this particular circumstance, such as ground slam totems, pretty much clock up near 10 million DPS with divergent multi-strike. You can use this exact same tree for that type of build. I've also sort of refined this a bit better, so it's got a lot more health pool as well, at the expense of a little bit of damage, and I'll show you what you can do if you want to flog it up another like 500, 700k damage and get it to 8.5 million DPS per totem. But anyway, let's talk about the configurations, or let's talk about the build in general. So, this is clearly a Consecrated Path Slam Totem, whatever the hell you want to call it, Chieftain. Now, I'll talk about it shortly, how we generate power charges. It relies on buffing up using your Protector Totems, and then obviously we've got a Val War Chief Totem in here too, which then buffs it up even more. The other thing that we also use to buff these totems up is Assassin's Mark, which will proc on the enemy. It's going to increase the amount of damage that it crits do. And also we're using Wave of Conviction on a detonate mine setup, or a high impact mine setup. And I'll talk about why we do this and what the impact of this is further throughout the video. So anyway, let's just look at config first, and you can call me out on any bullshit that might be in the tree, but I'm pretty confident at this stage I've gotten it right. So pretty much just starting from down here. So yes, we have it on Cyrus damage. Consecrated ground, we're using Consecrated Path, so always on Consecrated ground. Covered in ash, this is coming from the Ascendency, which is Hinakora's Death Fury, so cover rare or unique enemies in ash for 10 seconds on hit. So yes, that's a thing. Enemies are ignited. This is actually coming from our Protector Totems and not our Consecrated Path Totems, because we're running Elemental Focus in the Cons Path Totems. We do not run that in our Protector Totems though, and we run Combustion, which has 25% chance to ignite, so tick for Ignite. Plus we also get Ignite in our Ascendancy as well, I believe. Yes, from Sun's Light we get another 25% chance to Ignite, so we have 50% chance to Ignite. And we're hitting a hell of a lot of times, so that config is on. Enemies are blinded. Again, this is in the Protector Totems. They're an absolute utility totem, but yes, enemies are blinded, which makes it a little harder for them to actually kill us as well. Back to config. Close range, this is just the stat for your Consecrated Paths, so the closer the enemies are, they do more damage. And this has a pretty good impact. It's like 800,000 DPS impact. Actually, no, 1.2 million DPS impact, so the closer you cast your conch totems, the more damage they're going to do. Because this does use Wave of Conviction, and we trigger that through our mines, we do have fire exposure. We're always in blood stance, and I never really change it out of blood stance. You don't really need the extra AoE. It is good for map clear, but it's not make or break. Soul gain prevention, because we're using Val Ancestral Totems. Yes, we do have that. We also have fire damage taken recently. So the reason why we do this, or have that stat ticked, is because we're using cleansing water, and this means that 20% of physical damage from hits taken are taken as fire damage. Now we can change this, but we'll talk about this a little bit later in the video. We are leeching. Our totems leech, so we use War's Herald, so 2% of damage dealt by totems is leeched back to you as life, so yes, we are leeching. And that applies to any buff that applies leech, i.e. this one down here. So if you needed to amp up your damage a little bit, or if you wanted to add leech into the build, you absolutely could. Outside of that, we have you summoned a totem recently? Yes, we've had 5 totems. Are you on Consecrated ground? Yes, Consecrated Path means we're on Consecrated ground. Frenzy and power charges? Yes. Now, this is where I fucked up in the last version of this video, and I'm having to re-record absolutely everything all over again because I was not happy with that, and I'll be damned if I'm going to leave a wrong video up. So, the way that we achieve this is through the use of... I'll just bring it into the actual game itself. So it's through the use of high impact mines. So my understanding with mines, and the reason why, if we were to try and cast this ourselves, Ancestral Bond would stop that. So it means you can't deal damage with your skills yourself. So what high impact mines does is it actually triggers the skill from the mine, and the mine is not counted as part of the player. It's buffed by the stats of the player, but the actual ability is not buffed by the player. At least that's my understanding for Wave of Conviction. Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, further to that, what this also means is we run charged mines, and we generate power charges and frenzy charges as we trigger mines near enemies. So pretty much we drop our mine, we trigger it as we cast our totems, and our totems last a fair while, so, you know, go figure. And then basically that just does huge amounts of damage, and it'll generate your 3 power charges and 3 frenzy charges. So Bob's your uncle, that's how you get around that hurdle. That's going to amp your damage up significantly further from that point. Also just basically blast your enemies. Now in the B-roll at the start I've only put like 1 10 boss encounter, and that was actually before I put charged mines into this, or high impact mines. It's actually way more powerful now. It pretty much just like eviscerates endgame content, which is ridiculous. And that's with pretty much any totem skill you put in there. You know, I actually like Ice Crash. I really like Ground Slam as well. But right now I'm just using Anomalous Consecrated Path. But that's pretty much it for the configurations. Yeah, it's a pretty consistent build from that front. But I think the next part that we'll talk about, if my thingo stops freezing, as we'll talk about skill tree progression next. Okay, skill tree progression. So this one I've done a little bit more work than what I have done in the past with different builds. I've actually given you 3 iterations of the tree, so starting at 40, and then moving to 70, and then moving to 96 in the tree. The reason why I've capped at 96, like, to be honest with you, I've just basically put more health nodes in at 96. You could take it to 95 and have about 5,800 health, as you can see there on screen. The reason why I've only taken it to 95, give or take 96, is because people generally get bored of builds by about that point. You've really got to be hardcore if you want to get it to level 100. Now, if you get to level 100, you can amp it up in defensive stats or do whatever the hell you want. This build is basically going to do everything in the end game, at least as far as I know, void of what will be coming out in the Balanced Manifesto tomorrow and the patch notes. But anyway, without going into too much detail in the tree, key nodes that we're targeting that amp up damage will be Iron Will, and we'll talk about this soon. And then also maxing out crit, maxing out our totem mastery, and also our totem effect, which is coming from this one here, buff effect on totems. And I'll talk about damage sources very shortly, and this is very important that buff effect is in here. Outside of that, the large cluster duels that I'm running on this build include Veteran Defender. This gives you all attributes and resistances, because resistance balancing is a little bit finicky in this build. Fuel the Fight and Martial Prowess, so accuracy, attack speed, attack damage. And then I've got Ancestral Echo and Ancestral Guidance, which is really important to buff the effect of totems, because you want your protector totems to keep buffing the speed and attack of your totems, which increases their damage. And then I've got Ancestral Guidance and Sleeping Sentries, which means that you also get Onslaught, and your totems get Onslaught, as far as I'm aware. So, and it also increases their duration. Pretty much the same goes up here. I've got another large cluster node here, Fuel the Fight, weight advantage, and Martial Prowess. This is going to increase strength and have a chance to do double damage with Mace or Scepter skills, but this is just really good for scaling up damage. These are really cheap, like non-meta clusters, or non-meta at least in 3.16. Who knows? You know, maybe totems are the go-to for the next league. But yeah, pretty much just an overall really good tree. So pretty much the first key target in leveling this build up is to go for Ancestral Bond. Now, you don't necessarily have to take this route. You could actually go straight across here once you pull up in here and pick this up really early, which you can do by like level 20. So entirely up to you. And in fact, most players are probably going to do that. The difference is negligible between going either route. So you'll use the same amount of points either way. It doesn't matter which way you go. And then pretty much from there, you're going to get Ancestral Bond, and then you pick up some health nodes, pick up your first sort of nodes that you're going to get from Painforger and things like that for crit. And then we're going to go to the level 70 tree, which when I figure out how to click buttons on the mouse, we're pretty much going to pick up all these other little bits and pieces down here, extra crit, you know, dual sockets, you name it, strength, because this is strength stacking, by the way, I probably should have said that. And then we're going to, you know, pick up all these nodes down here, pick up all this, and then finally, by the time you get to your endpoint, you're going to allocate all your cluster nodes. Now, you can trade out, you don't necessarily need to do it in that order. You can sort of pick your cluster nodes and then put more into HP, which is probably what I would end up doing, to up your damage and then up your survivability. By the time you get to like level 95, 96, or now even 94, realistically you can get to 94 without having to allocate anything else in the additional health nodes. It just means that you'll be a little less survivable than what you were previously. But that's pretty much it from the tree perspective. It's a relatively straightforward tree. There's no like real weird bullshit or anything like that that you need to worry about. And even if you were to go to level 100, so say you were to push that far, you could pick up these critical nodes in here, and then you basically hit 8.87 mil DPS, and this is only with like a really budget 1254 strength as well. So this is like really cheap sort of gearing on the strength department, but we'll talk about that very shortly in gearing. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Now for your Ascendancy, this does sort of underbake the damage here for defense. So we traded out defense to go with, traded out damage for defense. Now, if you didn't want to go to Salo's Cleansing Water, you could actually strip this back and put Moon's Presence. This will put you straight at 8.42 million DPS with 5.7k or 5.8k HP. This is going to increase your AoE effect as well, but it will make you just that little bit less survivable, even though you've got nearly 11,000 armor on this build. So it's entirely up to you as to what you want to do with this. Maybe if you're sort of leveling up, this is the better direction to go. But if you sort of want to take a punt and really bash through enemies, then this is a good way to get to that 8.42 million DPS mark. And actually, we might just save the tree as that anyway. So it's entirely up to you. You can do what you want with that. But that's pretty much the Ascendancy, and obviously Chieftain is the name of the game. But yeah, that's pretty much the tree. Really straightforward, and it'll all be in the description with the path buildings. There'll be 2 trees, and I'll explain why there'll be 2 trees, which is a cheaper gearing option and the more expensive gearing option, which I currently have here. But we'll talk about that very shortly. Okay, gearing and progression. So pretty much from a gearing perspective, there are some really key unique items that we'll talk about here. And I'll go through the ones that are really the priority items that you need. So the first being the Brutus Led Sprinkler. So if you notice here, you get 4 to 7 fire damage, 2 attacks with this weapon per 10 strength. Now the benefit of this is we're strength stacking, which means that, you know, as we get to 1254 strength, and this is really low point strength, like I've seen these builds hit up to 2200 strength, and I'll tell you exactly where to target that. But as our strength goes up, then, pardon me, we get Brutus Led Sprinkler involved here. Now you can get this item really early in the game. It's a really cheap item, in fact. Yeah, like a 5 chaos item in the current league, 5 to 20 chaos. So you could get this on the first day, and this will just give you ridiculous amounts of DPS straight up. So as you get more strength, you do more damage. This then synergizes to the second item that you should focus on, which would be the Crown of the Eyes, which, if we have a look at cost-wise, is again a 5 chaos item to 10 chaos item. Really cheap on league start, because no one really played Consecrated Path Totems. This is a really good item. And the reason why, number one, increases and reductions to spell damage also apply to 150% of their value. Now this may seem like nothing, but what actually this means is as we stack strength, we take this node Iron Will. And what Iron Will does is strength damage applies to all spell damage as well, which means any strength damage applies to spell damage. And what our Helm does is any increase to spell damage, which the strength increases spell damage, then applies to attacks at 150% their value. Which means our attack skill here, which it has attack in the text there, the descriptor, is getting buffed by 150% of the conversion to, or the conversion from spell damage, which is converting from the strength through Iron Will. And that's where a lot of our big damage comes from, and how this build sort of works, which is why this helm in particular is really important. Also gives you 350 roundabouts accuracy, which is really good for the build. and increases your leech as well. Very minimal downsides. Now, this one I don't have the right helm enchant, but you want Ancestral Protectors do 18% increased damage while active, or buff damage while active, or attack speed, sorry. That's going to significantly amp up your DPS, and in the tree, that's what I've provided for. Now, the fourth item you're going to want is simply an Alberon's Warpath. Let's be honest, this drops constantly all throughout the game. Really easy to get, and the reason why is the strength percentage roll. That's pretty much it. Astramentis, and we've got Shaman's Dominion, which is pretty cheap and annoying. This is simply just to buff attributes. This is a strength stacking build, so this just helps you stack strength, sorry. And again, really cheap item. It's near League End for Scourge, but this item is never really too expensive in League anyway. And, you know, depending on how many people play this build, it's pretty achievable to get. Those are pretty much the big key uniques here. Flasking, there's no requirement for the flasks. Everything else in gearing, so Iron Fortress is something you'll get later on, and in the trees I've actually provided for 2 iterations of the build. So you'll see a low value tree and a high value tree. One has Iron Fortress, one has Belly of the Beast or Carcass Jack, whatever you want to switch out. Even an Ambu's Charge, you'll get 6.16 million DPS at endgame, and you'll still have a good amount of life. You could go AoE and you could get a Carcass Jack. You get a little bit more damage, but you won't be able to convert to armor. You'll lose armor in that process, but not too much. I would not recommend Brass Dome. The reason why is it takes away all the attributes from strength. It does give you shitload of armor and max cap resistances, but not a wise decision otherwise. But outside of that, that's pretty much the goer. And then the other thing is obviously Bottled Faith. Let's be real, you're not going to get a Bottled Faith straight up, so you probably sit on like 6.9 million DPS. But, you know, your trade out for that is you could just get a Diamond Flask. Honestly, you'll lose about 1 million DPS, but it is what it is. Like Bottled Faith, and even, you know, when you're playing through leagues like 14 to 20x sometimes, and at league start, it's not viable. Diamond Flask is going to do the job, at least for the time being, and you could get attack speed and things like that. And that's how I would level that up. And then once you can afford a Bottled Faith, once you kill enough bosses with this mofo, then you can afford it. Now, Watcher's Eye, quite frankly, this you don't need the determination roll because we're not running that. But the critical strike multiplier, while affected by anger, is a pretty unused modifier. So it's relatively cheap. If you can get fire penetration with anger, then that will also work pretty well as well. Everything else is just basically crit, resistance, and health. That's it. So max crit rolls, resistance, and health. That's it. And that's pretty much like, that's just, you know, not even perfect rolls. If you min and max, you get double crit rolls and things like that. Fire skill crit. That's all going to contribute to more damage. But that's pretty much the gearing of the build. It's not a crazy build to gear. It's not like overly complex. The mechanics are pretty sound. Now, you can get more strength on the gloves. You definitely can get more strength on the belt. This is a synthesized belt, but I would actually just get a heavy belt with a with an explicit percentage strength roll, plus a flat strength roll as well. This is going to increase your strength further. You can switch out the Alberons and put something in with, you know, percentage strength on the boots. You can roll that. Rings, definitely get better rings. And then shield, I don't even have strength on my shield, so that's also a thing. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the gearing of this particular build. It's not complex in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, next section will be gem setups. Alright, I thought I'd talk through gem setups through using the PoB, because this is what we're all going to be looking at when we're building this build initially. So, first of all, Anomalous Consecrated Path. You're not going to have this straight away, so normal Consecrated Path is fine. Awaken Elemental Focus. In the absence of that, just normal Elemental Focus is fine. Earthbreaker, obviously, Slam Totems. Elemental damage to attacks, obviously you won't have Awaken straight up, and then we're going to be running Fire Pen. Now, Awaken Fire Pen is always really cheap in League, so you can do that, that's fine. Now, these are only level 5, up to level 5s, which I know is max level, but if you commit to the build, you know, you'll get there. Then we've also got Ruthless as well. So again, this is just your standard Ruthless. You could get level 21. This will just increase your damage more. Bob's your uncle. Now, just looking at our other skills, so in our, that was our chest. So in our mace, we've got Leap Slam, Ancestral War Chief, and faster attacks. You want to make sure that your War Chief and your Protector are in different sockets, and you don't want your War Chief attached to your multiple totems. Otherwise, it's going to cast like 4 totems every time you cast one of these 2 totems, and that's going to eat into your Consecrated Path Totems, because it should be a sequence of 3 Consecrated Path Totems, cast one of your Protector Totems, and then, you know, you'll cast your War Chief, and then cast another Consecrated Path Totem, and then that'll do the job. So 3 Cons Path Totems, 1 War Chief, or Val War Chief, and 1 Protector. So then from there, Crown of Eyes is going to have Wave of Conviction. I do have a Portal Gem, Charged Mines, and then High Impact Mines. That's going to help you generate your Power and Frenzy charges, just like that. In the shield, I am running Enlightens. You don't need Enlighten straight away. The mana balancing is really easy in this build compared to others. I do run a Clarity. If I was going to go all out, I would actually be running a better Clarity gem, like Anomalous Clarity, I think it is, which increases your total damage. And then Blood and Sand, obviously, because we want to be able to switch stances, and that beefs up our damage from our AoE skills. Now, I do have an unset ring. I run Steel Skin as well, and I just have that mapped to my move button, which is, quite frankly, the best defensive skill for this build, because it just soaks up, you know, depending on the level of the gem, shitloads of damage. In my gloves, I'm just running Phantasmal Ancestral Protector, and that's simply because that does more attack speed as you quality it up. I do have multiple totems. I use Blind, but you can run an Enhance, which increases the quality of your Phantasmal Ancestral Protector. It's up to you. And then Combustion to apply Ignite and fire, you know, fire resistance reduction. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. And then in boots, just Anger, Precision, Assassin's Mark, which will pop on bosses or harder enemies, and it'll just melt enemies with that. And then I've got another Enlighten just for good measure. You don't need a level 3 Enlighten straight away. It will be a little bit more constrained to cast, but the totem cast is only 27 mana, and that's reduced by the fact that I've got non-channeling skills have -6 in the ring socket, and then also we do use a Replica Conqueror's Efficiency to get around that as well, to reduce the impact of mana cost. Now, these are pretty easy to farm in Heist. Pretty much just go in and you run the Replica Grand Heist, and you will almost find one of these at most of them. They're pretty common in the lower levels. Instead of paying like 20-30 chaos for it. So yeah, have fun with that. That's pretty much it for gearing. It's not a hard gear to, or gem setup, sorry. It's not a hard sort of build to gem setup in. Now, if you wanted to switch out skills and play with the tree, if you're running any totems, like I actually like Grand Slam. Grand Slam actually does crazy good damage. And instead of running Ruthless, I would run Multi-Strike with Divergent. And you get basically 10 million DPS with that. So, and I'm very seriously considering running Grand Slam for next league. So, Grand Slam totems, because they're just egregiously powerful for no real apparent reason. That's no rapid expansion on that. It's got huge AoE, 50 fucking AoE radius. Like, it's insane. It's absolutely insane. And you could put more AoE into that, but it doesn't even need it. So yeah, you could do that, and pretty much you could switch this build out. This build is so homogenized with any sort of slam skill. Quite frankly, if they put a new slam skill in the game this next league, we could run the new skill off the cuff in the totems, and it would probably work if it's a half decent skill. This just scales every slam skill out into the tens of millions of DPS. So, you know, it's entirely up to you. At this point, it's at like 30 mil DPS. That's going to cheese pretty much most things. It's not a minion build, and, you know, by no means is this build not perfect. But it is relatively easy to gear, and it's very forgiving. And it scales really well. As long as you've got a Brutus Lead Sprinkler and a Crown of Eyes, you can make this build work. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the gearing. Or the gem setup, sorry. I keep saying gearing. Okay, so in the notes, I've also added in something just about sources of damage. And it's really easy to sort of get sidetracked and not fully understand the sources of damage in this build, it is actually quite a tedious build to sort of unpack. So I'll talk my way through this, and hopefully this sort of makes sense, because it took me a little bit to sort of get my head around this. But yeah, so anyway, the first I'll just delete this in here because I had it wrong in here. All right, because I'm not using critical mastery points in the tree anymore. So the first thing to understand is just how this build sort of builds damage out. So it relies very heavily on buffing totems. And what I mean by that is you'll notice the first point you take is Panopticon, right? So it has a stat here, 50% increased buffs from your ancestral totems or ancestor totems while active. What this basically means is if we sort of translate this back to the game itself, while we've got this totem up, you'll notice this. So see how the damage is 194k in the tree? If I drop my 3 totems, it's 238k. Now, if we drop the Ancestral Protector Totems, it goes up to 397k, which basically means as this totem is dropped down, your overall attack speed to everything, including yourself, everything goes up by the buffed percentage of the totem, or the totem buff percentage, but also is amplified by the buff effect on the actual totem buff, which is allocated through the points in the tree. And any other items like the Helm enchant for 18% increased attack damage for Ancestral Protector Totems while up. So what this basically means is if you focus on these points and buffing the totems up, or totem effect up, totem buff effect up, then your damage will actually go through the roof. And that's exactly what we do. So we get these ancestral guidance nodes here, which go 30% and then 30%, so 60%, plus the node here, which is 50%, plus we also get a huge buff from the mastery here, which is not that one, it is here, so you get 100%. So by doing that, you're getting this stupid amount of buffing to your existing totems. So War Chief totems buff up physical damage or damage, and your Protector totems buff up attack speed, and the synergization with those is a huge uplift in damage, which is why you want to run any totem build with your other Protector totems and your War Chief totems in the background and have them as support totems to your primary totems. That's a lot of totems to understand. Second is, well, I've got it in there, double stacked Ancestral Guidance Totems. The next buff effect is coming off the Brutus Lead Sprinkler, and this is the 4 to 7 fire damage with attacks with this weapon per 10 strength. Now this is strength stacking, no brainer. You get 4 to 7 damage, fire damage for every 10 strength. Divide that by 10, you got a lot of strength, a lot of stats, a lot of increase to that. So it's better than like any mastercrafted weapon, basically. That's why this weapon is just so gratuitous, and really like you could use it on so many different builds to get that effect as long as you compound strength. The other thing is, second to that is the buff effect of the Iron Fortress once you get one, which basically means strength damage bonus instead gives 3% increased melee physical damage per 10 strength, which basically means it's reconverting the increased damage here and providing, an extra 3%, or it's not even converting, it's just providing an extra 3% melee physical damage per 10 strength. So again, you've got the stat off of the Brutus Lead Sprinkler, but for every 10 strength, you get 4 to 7 fire damage, and then 3% increased melee physical damage for every 10 strength as well. So, that's another huge source of DPS. The other thing is the Bottle Faith is the next thing. So your Bottle Faith is giving you increased crit chance while enemies are on Consecrated Ground. It also results in enemies taking more damage while on Consecrated Ground and a 40% increase to damage. So if we pop this while we have our skill here, it'll go up to 200,000 DPS, and then it'll scale by that increase. So it goes up to 409,000 DPS. It's not catastrophic levels, but it's still big when you calculate it out in the tree. Outside of that, crit and crit multi-stacking on your jewels. So any jewels that you're running, you pretty much want to have this. So, any attack speed, crit multi, fire damage, physical damage is all going to increase your stats. In particular, crit multi is the biggie. Any jewel that you run in this build, you want crit multi. That's just going to, by default, give you huge amounts of damage. Assassin Mark is also going to increase your damage as well. So it's another source of damage on the tree. So anyone curse or hits against curse enemies have 47% increased crit multi, which is huge. Also crit chance, and 100% chance to gain power charge, which doesn't really work very well when you're bossing, but it does. The benefits of having it applied on the enemy to get the extra crit multi is what you're really after, and the extra crit chance. Another area where we're picking up increased damage, which isn't in this tree, but is in the PoB tree. Actually, it is in this tree. Sorry. Is actually, well, Moon's Presence does that, but... Oh. Yeah, it sort of does that. But it's a combination of these, yeah, Tukohama's, Ward's Herald. So the 100% increased buff effect, as we spoke about, is pretty much one of the big sort of areas where, you know, you're getting a huge amount of buffing. And yeah, that's again like a huge source of DPS. If we pull this down into our actual tree and we look at the damage, so we got 8.42 million, we lose like 3 million DPS from that, or 2.6 million DPS. So it's significant, to the point that it has a material effect on the actual build. And lastly is Wave of Conviction. So
I cannot do this yet.
this means that you can do exposure. And what this means in the PoB translation of this is, so if we tick this off, we would lose about 1 million damage. Just shy of a million, like 950,000 DPS. So it's significant, and the fact that we trigger it on mines means we can melt enemies even quicker. But that's pretty much all of the synergies in the build that provide damage. And initially when you first look at this build, it's very hard to sort of determine how to actually build this build out. I know it was very tedious for me to figure it out. I tried the league before last and I failed terribly. But this time around, I feel like I have got my head around it to the point that I can actually produce a video on it and understand the build. So, you know, that's pretty much the go. All right, and lastly, the last thing that we should talk about is the continuation of the Iron Fortress. So obviously we accumulate a large amount of damage from this. However, in 3.17, GGG's confirmed that Prophecy is being removed, and the Iron Fortress is actually a Prophecy from Iron Heart. So fear not, this has actually been addressed in these notes here, which indicates this. In a few cases, the fated unique or fated version of a unique item felt worth keeping in the game, but there was little value in having the fated and base version of the unique item be separate. In these cases, the fated unique item will be disabled, but the base unique item will be modified to be identical or similar to the old fated version. These are Winterweave, Thirst of Horrors, Cragfall, Jeffrey's Legacy, the Iron Fortress, which is what we use, and the Dancing Duo and Time Twist. In fact, we've already seen the Dancing Duo get converted in the Twitter feed as well. And Jeffrey's Legacy is like if you want to play Holy Relic Totems. It's a really cool build, and I might play it one day, but not this league. So the Iron Fortress is actually going to make its way into the next league as a base item drop in the main game, so in the base pool. So that being said, we don't need to worry about not being able to access the one fated unique item in the game. It is actually going to still be in the game, and we should be okay. So I know that people will be concerned about that with this build, and me sort of advocating for it as a something to plan to play next league, but it won't impact the actual next league. We'll be able to access the Iron Fortress, which is this cool ass armor I've got on my character here. Alright, so yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions or anything like that, chuck it down in the comments. I'll have everything in the description, the 2 POBs that I've said. Now you can sort of, pardon me, you can sort of switch this tree up and put it in the, you can put it in the Slayer Ascendancy, which is really interesting. I haven't tried it, but it works in POB. Whether or not it would work in the actual game, I'm not too sure. You'll lose the leech, but if you get enough regen, you can make it work. But yeah, anyway, if you like this video, like and sub. Obviously, this is pre-patch notes, so patch notes could change things, but honestly, this build is so rock solid. It wasn't played last week either. If anything, it might receive buffs, and if it receives buffs, holy shit. But yeah, anyway, yeah, we'll see what happens in the patch notes, but yeah, if this helps you plan for next league, it's even better. But yeah, also follow the Twitch. I've been streaming on Twitch as of late just because it's easier while I'm trying to sort of work and everything in my full-time job mode. So yeah, anyway, until next time, have a good one. Don't forget to like and sub, and bye.